I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
From the gates of Mount Rome to the far corners of the Endless Highway, wherever you are, welcome to the show.
So you believe in some kind of Armageddon?
Yeah, most definitely. We in the last times and days right now. The Illuminati's in effect.
Welcome back to the show. I want to say thank you to all my listeners out there. The numbers have been great, so keep listening, keep sharing the show with your friends. Thank you for that. With me today, someone I've been wanting to talk to for a very long time. He is a world traveler, he's an author, adventurer, publisher, and a scholar of the ancient past. Brad Olsen, thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, Tim, it's great to be here. Thank you for getting in touch with me and having me on.
Yeah. So what we were talking about before I hit record was starting to get real interesting there. You told me about this William Henry guy who knows his way around Nashville, but what I'm looking for is like ancient Nashville stuff, right? And like we were talking about star forts and all that. So I'm always down to like pick anybody's brain. Or I know you've done books on this. Did you find anything with Tennessee in general?
Well, we were talking just a moment ago about the Parthenon, which is located there, which is a life-size replica, including a statue of Zeus in the rear of the temple, and that alone would make it worth the price of admission to go see that. Nashville's not a city I'm very familiar with, but I do know that in the Mississippi River Valley and of course on the Ohio River Valley above Kentucky, there are quite a few mound sites. And that's something that I write about in my book, Sacred Places North America, because this is a culture that lived in North America for thousands of years, and we really know very little about them. I did a documentary with the Journey to Truth guys about the Cahokia Mounds. You can find that online. I think it's The Mysteries of Cahokia, it's called. And I've been there several times. I grew up in Illinois, so as a kid, we would go to Devil's Lake, which has effigy mounds in southern Wisconsin, and other mound sites in Wisconsin like Aztalan, and then of course Cahokia down in the southern part of Illinois, right across from St. Louis. That Mound City, Tim, at the time of London being the largest city in Europe, it had a larger population in Cahokia.
Yeah.
And the base of the largest earthen mound, it's called Monk's Mound, has a larger base area than the Great Pyramid. So there's just so much about these mound sites that I'm just utterly fascinated with. Every time I'm back in the Midwest, I try to make a trip out to one that I haven't been to before.
Yeah, and I have a picture of a giant boulder in St. Louis, and it's got a little plaque on it that says Mound City. It's just, it's pointing back to this era that you're talking about. It's just a remnant of the past. And I've actually been looking at St. Louis, Cahokia, and Monk's Mound and just doing as much research on that as I can, because that's an indicator for me that some of our American cities go back further than the Wikipedia founded by date. People have been living in some of these cities for thousands of years. And I think St. Louis is a great example of that. And that's what I'm seeing with Nashville. And I won't regale everybody because I've talked about it a lot recently on the show, but I have an old article. And in the article, they're talking about this cave they found under Nashville that's connected to the Star Fort, where they found a sarcophagus. And I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot more to it, but they were saying in the article that this was a place where an ancient city once was, an ancient extinct race. They had all this crazy lingo in the article. And it's like, well, what happened to that narrative?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's right. St. Louis was known as Mound City. There were mounds everywhere, but as the city continued to grow and expand, like many of the mound sites across the country, they just got bulldozed over. There was no longer a need for them or a want to preserve them. And so only the ones that were in more remote areas, such as Cahokia, which is about 25 or 30 miles away, out in farmland in Illinois, a town called Collinsville, then those ones are the ones that survived. But there's another aspect of the mound sites, which is also really fascinating. And that is, in many cases, giants were found in the burial mounds, really tall ones, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet tall, sometimes wearing suits of armor. And that's really peculiar because the Native American culture was not known to have used the art of smelting metal, that is, mixing two element metals to make a stronger metal. Yet you have some of these giants that were in a suit of armor made out of bronze. And that indeed is a metal that requires a bit of sophistication to get the right copper and tin, the right proportions to create a stronger compound of bronze.
Yeah, and a lot of the old articles that I've seen that have anything to do with giants, often you'll see mentioned on their belonging or whatever is like copper beads or copper artifacts of some sort. And I think that points back to them being involved with the copper trade based out of the Great Lakes.
Yep.
That's what it's. And I know it's not a lot of copper that they're pulling out of these mounds, but it's like they had copper bracelets and I guess necklaces, or they had beads for something and earrings and stuff like that. So that's just an indicator that they had access to this stuff enough to where they were like adorning themselves with it, right?
As well as tools and
Tools,
weapons
yes.
also. Some of the museums, and they're usually in the smaller museums. I don't think you can find it in the Smithsonian, but
Right.
once in a while, a small museum in Ohio or Illinois, Wisconsin, or Michigan will have some of these artifacts, and they're created by combining different metals, mainly copper and tin. And you mentioned the copper mines of the Great Lakes and Lake Superior. I went to those up in the Upper Peninsula one time when I was driving across. It's really fascinating. And they still have the tools where they're pounding out the raw copper, which is one of the largest copper mines in the world and still is today. They're still extracting copper in the Upper Peninsula. But what makes this location so unusual, not only is it quite far away and even on Isle Royale in Lake Superior, it's difficult to get to. I mean, Lake Superior is a big and sometimes tumultuous lake. That's where the Edmund Fitzgerald sank in the famous song. But the copper trade was bigger than just the Native Americans. Now, they may have been mining some of it and trading it amongst themselves. But I was on a episode of America Unearthed with Scott Walter, and we did the show down in southern suburb of Chicago in Lyons, Illinois, where there is a passage between the South Branch of the Chicago River and the a mud lake to get to Des Plaines River. So in years of heavy rain, you could actually have your crew pull a heavily laden boat across this portage. And this is the nature of the episode that we taped there. But it was more about this very enigmatic statue that was found right at the mouth of the Chicago River and Lake Michigan. And it's called the Waubansee Stone. And this is the very first artifact that it was ever found in Chicago. And what makes it so fascinating is that it was there from the time of the very Fort Dearborn, the very first Fort Dearborn, and it was there. It's still now there in the Chicago Historical Society, but they don't have it on display anymore. It's so important. Here's the book Sacred Place in North America.
Yeah.
There's the Waubansee Stone.
Yep.
And you see it's quite interesting. Not only is it a megalithic stone, but it's this flat-faced face, and it's got a little goatee beard. Now, Native Americans weren't known to have goatee beards. So we were discussing on America on Earth that this was a Phoenician artifact called a tophet, which was a sacrificial stone. And the only other places they're found was in old Carthage in North Africa, as well as one more. Wayne May was on the show. He was the publisher of American Archaeologist magazine, and he was saying that they found another one of these Waubansee type stones on the east coast of Florida. So the basic path would go like this, that the Phoenicians, it would be a multi-year trip. And just remember, if you're able to come back with a fully laden cargo of copper back to Homer's Greece, for example, you'd be a multimillionaire. So there's certainly a profit motive in a group of young men, adventurer sailors, to go off on these expeditions. So they would basically go in the North Atlantic. They call them the stepping stones. And it's basically when you leave the British Isles, you go to the Orkney Islands, then the Faroe Islands, and then you reach Iceland, then you cross over to Greenland. From Greenland, you can cross over to Labrador, which is on the coast of Canada. You hardly ever lose sight of land. And then you just follow the St. Lawrence Seaway to Lake Ontario. And in Lake Ontario, there are still to this day docks, and you bring a boat in, and then they raise the water, and then you go through the canal, a bunch of levees and locks that you can bring a boat through. But in the days of old, they could pull an empty boat up the hill to get to Lake Huron. And then from Lake Huron, it's just a little bit of a rapid to get up to Lake Superior. You work all season, filling your cargo hold with copper, and then you sail down via Chicago. And the whole point of the Waubansee stone, of course, Waubansee was the name of an Indian. They didn't know what it was, so they just named it after a chief who was at war with the men in the fort anyway. So it doesn't make any sense. But there's a cavity on top that's about exactly the size of an infant.
Yeah.
And so they would do a sacrifice. They would trade the Indians, whatever, for beads or trinkets to get a baby, because they believed in this human sacrifice to bless their journey. Then with a fully laden ship, they would go through Mud Lake to get to the Des Plaines River, to the Illinois River, to the Mississippi River, then up and around Florida, hugging the coastline. One more stop to get water and supplies, one more Tophet sacrifice, and then it's just catching the trade winds right on back to Europe.
Yeah.
And there it is. There's the full Waubansee stone of Chicago.
Big
find.
stone there. There's the indentation at the top that you're talking about.
Yep.
And the picture I get here is that the blood comes out through the mouth.
That's correct. And then in the bottom of the beard there is another cup. And you can see just at the very bottom of this picture, there is another exit for the blood to just drip right into, presumably right into the river. Yeah, there you see it.
So, speaking of our cities being older than we're told, this is another indicator for me that Chicago has been a city for a very long time. Way before, I think they say it was founded in the 1700s on Wikipedia. I think somewhere about thereabouts. But I think this pushes it way back. And this shows me that, you mentioned that there's another one of these they found down in Louisiana, right?
In Florida
Okay, in
on the
Florida.
East
So
Coast.
so they were doing rituals for passage,
Right.
whether it was entering our continent or leaving, right?
Hmm. That's right. And you can see that this is a very hard piece of stone. It's granite. It's a glacial erratic, meaning that the last ice age pushed this stone down from the Canadian Shield, which is where the stone originated from, hundreds of miles to the north. But of course, all the Great Lakes were once giant glaciers during the Wisconsin glaciation. And so this boulder got displaced down around Chicago. And you can see the detail and the intricacies of this carving. It was not an easy face to carve, and that some um, frontier soldier had time to chisel it away and then name it after the chieftain in the area. It really makes no sense. I mean, this is obviously a very skilled craftsperson who did this face and the design and got the cavity on the top exactly the right proportion for a newborn infant.
Now, were there other artifacts found, not here in North America, but elsewhere, where they feature a face similar to this? And I think I've heard somebody liken it to like a death face or something like that. I don't know if that's correct, but you
Yeah,
get what
well, that's a good point, Tim, because yes, it does look like a death mask.
death
And
mask.
those were quite common with burials during pre-Christian Europe. But this is basically a sacrificial stone
Mhm.
that was in what was called a tophet, which is basically a temple that had surrounded it. And these stones are found in present day Tunisia, which
Ah,
was the homeland of the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, who were these master sailors that went around the world looking for resources. So once they found the route to get to the copper in Lake Superior, subsequent other voyages would take place. And then when they would get to the mouth of the Chicago River and Lake Michigan, then you'd have your Waubansee stone there ready for your child sacrifice to bless your journey on the rest of the way.
yeah. And I mean, it sounds like the old cultures that I've read about in the Old Testament, they Canaanites, Amorites, etc., they definitely practiced the ritual of human sacrifice, and a lot of them did what was referred to as passing the child through fire. It was some sort of another form of killing an infant for, I guess, for some sort of a ritual purpose.
Hmm.
My point is, it seems to point back to a culture from the Mediterranean or Mesopotamia coming here. You said Phoenician, I believe. And
Yeah.
of course, that's, I think Phoenician is a little bit more broad. I know you had the Phoenician Iberians that had, I don't know, camps or civilizations up on Spain and all that. But anyways, before I get too deep in the weeds here, I guess my point is like whether we're talking about Minoans, Phoenicians, Canaanites, Amorites, somebody from somewhere else was coming here a long, long time ago. And it just makes sense when you look at these artifacts, these out of place artifacts.
Oh, yeah. The UPAs, out of place artifacts. And
Yeah.
boy, North America is just chock full. And unfortunately, there's also a long history of the Smithsonian Institution destroying them, which is known as Smithsonian Gate, including the giant bones.
Hmm.
They would just take them out in a boat to the Atlantic and just dump them overseas because out of sight is out of mind, and they just didn't want to rewrite the history.
Yeah.
Plus, in the 19th century, it was still this doctrine of manifest destiny, and that is that the white settlers were free to take the land, and the Native Americans were considered savages. So if they were in your way, just go ahead and kill them or do whatever you need to do to make your way across the country and then support your homestead. So a lot of the culture just got erased, and it's a
Yeah.
real shame.
And it's a cover up. I mean, it's a massive cover up. It's hard for people new to this idea, this concept, or any of these concepts we're talking about today. If you're new to this, it's hard to imagine a cover up that big and that immense. But I keep coming against it time and time again in my research. I had a guy on, I've had two people on who each one found at least 700 articles that mention giants. I've found probably 20 myself. That people, that wasn't a hoax. All those old newspaper articles talking about giants, it was not a hoax. They weren't making that up. There's something to it. Um, and even here in Tennessee, there's three lakes I'm looking at right now. They're man-made lakes. I think John Wesley Powell is involved and the Smithsonian was involved, as well as some other government agencies where they went in and they buried or flooded ancient civilizations here in Tennessee. One is Tellico Lake.
Hmm.
There's 8 to 9 Cherokee cities down there underwater now because they put in the Tellico Dam. And there was also ancient sites there because the Cherokee moved into an ancient civilization. The ruins of an older civilization is what the Native Americans moved into there. So in one of the sites out here, it's called Norris Dam. They were excavating an old temple site there. And they had a guy from Cambridge out there who said, this is Egyptian. And the government came in and said, you've got a couple days to wrap up your excavation because we're about to put a dam in. And they did. They took this site that was looking to be as old or older than Göbekli Tepe, and they filled it in with concrete and put in the Norris Dam. So there was a cover up here. Now, I don't, that could be a whole other episode just chipping away at that. But, just to give just give people an idea, that's just Tennessee. That's just
Yeah.
Tennessee. And I found some articles recently because the Cherokee recorded an old war with giants up in I think it's in the Pennsylvania region today. The Delaware Indians brought in, well, so the Cherokee come from Iroquois stock. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah, they moved down. The Cherokee moved down from the north.
Okay.
But once when they were up there, the Delaware Indians called upon them for help in battle against these giants. And the giants were the Allegheny tribe that the Allegheny River is named after.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I went poking around and I found right outside of Pittsburgh, right there where the Ohio and the Allegheny meet, you've got mound sites right there. X
Hmm.
marks the spot. And guess what they pulled out of those mounds? Giants
Nice.
with copper bracelets.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, what more? It's written. It's right there. It's all spelled out for you.
Yeah, ancient America, boy, I think it still has a lot of secrets yet to be revealed. I'm out here in northwestern Nevada, where I relocated after California,
Mm.
and where I live is also Giants country. In the valley I live in is was part of a giant freshwater lake during the last ice age called Lake Lahashan. And all across the whole northwestern part of the state, you can see the striations. The lake level would rise and fall. It's called a terminal lake. All the water would come in, but it would just evaporate. So
Mm.
in years of drought, it would drop, and then heavy rain years, it would go back up again. And at the high water mark, Tim, at several locations I've been to are caves, including the most famous one called Lovelock Cave, where they found dozens of giants. Not just giants with red hair, but they were mummified, much like the Egyptian mummies, that they were wrapped and the bodies were preserved, and they were several feet taller than the Paiute Indians of the area. One of the one of the family members, her name was Sarah Winnemucca. The city of Winnemucca is named after her family here, about 100 miles away from where I'm at. And she wrote in her book that they were at war with these giants, and their name for them was Sitika. And then finally, the climax came because the Sitika would eat the Paiutes. Now, keep in mind that humans cannot eat humans. Animals cannot eat animals. Remember when they fed cow parts to cows in England? You have the mad cow disease. Same thing with every species. You cannot eat your own. Cannibalism will get you in the end. So if they were eating the Paiutes, they must have been different species, that they weren't quite the same. And so being size difference and hair color difference and everything else, the Paiutes finally cornered them. They were the ancient enemies to the Paiutes. They got all the Sitika into the Lovelock Cave and then collapsed an avalanche and then just kept burning fires so they would suffocate them out with the smoke. And eventually that was the end of it. According to Sarah Winnemucca's book, that's how they put an end to the reign of the giants in Nevada.
Yeah. I've been looking into a possible connection here. I haven't found it yet, just full disclosure, but I noticed that sometimes those Lovelock giants were called, you're saying Sitiqua, right? But I've seen it. Is it Sitiku as well? Okay.
It's like SI-TI-KAH, Sitika.
Okay. Okay. Well, the Cherokee had a city called Sitiku. And
Interesting.
yes, it looks like that word that you're saying. Now, I don't know if there's any connection or not, but I've been looking. We'll see.
Weren't they called the Moon People, the giants of the Appalachia? And they had a whole religion.
Well, so in this book over here, this is Myth of the Cherokee by James Mooney. This guy went and sat with Cherokee elders and recorded the legends straight from them. What he was told is that the Moon-Eyed people were, I think, a small race, like a race of like smaller people. I don't know that they were giants in this recording, but they had black eyes as if they were, and they only came out at night. So they were possibly nocturnal, I guess. But the Cherokee did have legends of giants as well. But the Moon-Eyed people,
they were called the Moon People, or
okay, maybe so. Yeah, maybe so. I still haven't like read this whole book yet. I've so, and it's full of stuff just like that. Now the Cherokee in North Carolina for sure had legends of giants, like mythical giants, and then you've got real like giants that they actually fought with, like flesh and blood giants, like the Alajiwi tribe. So I'm still kind of parsing through all that stuff. It's very interesting. It seems to me that in Tennessee, and if you look at Sparta and some other places, there was a lot of different variations with humans or even humanoids, because in Sparta, they found all these thousands of mass graves of little people. And it's very well documented.
That's the other interesting thing that really doesn't get as much attention as the giants, is the race of little people, including out in Hawaii as well. They're called the Menehune. And the Menehune would work at night, and they would build the Heiau temples and a whole bunch of other things, the other features, the City of Refuge, and all their megalithic buildings were built by these little Menehune. And when Captain Cook finally came to the islands, and he ultimately was killed there on the Big Island, but he saw that they're great big warriors. I mean, those were giants as well that come from Polynesia. And there was a second race of people, and they were the little ones, and they were even called the Menehune. So you have King Kamehameha, right? He was like 6'9" and 400 pounds. He was the first Hawaiian to unite all the islands because he used cannon and gunpowder that he got from the Europeans. But otherwise, it was always a stalemate. That the one giant clan from one island, they would just have hand-to-hand combat, and it was never really conclusive until Kamehameha brought in the cannon and the gunshot, because that
Yeah.
was conclusive.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit here with you. And I mean, well, I could probably segue it with this. I know the Cherokee had vast inner earth stories and legends. And I know you've probably come across that in your research too, where the natives have inner earth legends, right? Like I think the Hopi had the ant people, and you just see it kind of sprinkled across antiquity, right? But when I'm looking at the inner earth stuff, I'm thinking, oh, this sounds a lot like Agartha, because I also like love to research Nazi occultism and that sort of thing. So I'd like to, and I know you do too. So I had to go there. And I was just thinking about inner Earth and Antarctica, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I think Brad's been to Antarctica.
Yeah, I did.
Did you see any evidence of any entrances to inner Earth down there?
Boy, boy, I wish I could say I did,
Mm.
but we were just in a pretty small corridor on the Palmer Peninsula. But when I went to each one of the research bases, I had a similar line of questioning, which is, do you know anything about these rumored three motherships below the ice that the intelligence agencies nicknamed Nina Pinta and Santa Maria? No, didn't hear about that. Have you heard about the pyramids poking through the ice? No, they're just non-attacks, attractive mountains. How about perhaps giants or any megafauna or megaflora? No, didn't hear about that. But what I did hear about was that there was a big no-fly zone near the South Pole, and that's where Admiral Byrd said he flew over the very first flight of the South Pole. And in my new book that's coming out called The Secrets of Antarctica, I have the chart of his 1928 flight, and he did a big triangular formation on the side of the pole that is the no-fly zone. So I suspect he spotted it, because in Operation High Jump, he went back, and in his diary, they flew into the hole and then went to the domain of the Ariani, is the name he gave it. And they were escorted in by two German Flugelrad UFO craft to meet the master. So that could be Agartha. And in my research for this new book, we're looking at these U-boat maps of the captains of the submarine fleet that were meant to be handed out in 1945. The war ended, and the Soviets captured the naval intelligence offices in Berlin first. And they took everything back to Moscow. Much of the stuff just sat in cabinets for a long, long time. But it shows in really no uncertain terms how you could take a submarine under the ice, surface up at some lakes, move along the lakes, dive again, and then arrive at the lighthouse of Agartha. That's the actual words they use in the map, in the instructions section. So it's just really just amazing how much mystery and caves, as well as geothermal features, because Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world, 91 known volcanoes. So the propensity to create these large under ice domes, which would be a temperate climate, which could have its own life forms growing. We all know that down at the bottom of the ocean, wherever there's a heat vent, there's all kinds of life that thrives around it. But to answer your question, I didn't see the entrance, but I found out later that when we went to visit the Vernansky base, which is run by the Ukrainians, that they got from the British, that we were walking a couple miles to go to an old Operation Tamberlin when they were spying on the Nazis in New Schwabenland. to go to one of their bases, which the doors open, you open it up, there's still cans of food from the 1930s on the shelf. I mean,
Wow.
it's just like a journey back in time. But after I came back from the trip, we found out that there was a huge cavern underneath that big glacier that we had to cross. So it's like a whole world down there,
Yeah.
Tim. And
Yeah.
now they're finding, yeah, there's lakes and rivers that flow through, and with that, you're going to have different forms of life.
I think it's so telling the title there, the Lighthouse of Agartha. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That's so telling, and like the Germans would do that with their titles. They would be super obvious with their titles. I mean, I remember, I think it was 2016, the Norwegians found a Nazi base up near the North Pole, and Germans had called it Scheissgraber, which is German for treasure hunter, because
Mhm.
they were up there looking for treasure. Essentially, they looking for this ancient civilization, Thule or Hyperborea, but they named it treasure hunter because that's what they were doing. They were super obvious with their titles. But you read a letter on forbidden knowledge about it stood out to me because you said something that like really got me thinking. You said in the letter that you guys recovered, Dr. Karl Haushofer and Hess were right about the Earth being hollow,
Right.
and it something about a U-boat that made it. What do you make of that?
Well, why don't I pull it up or
Please,
just read it to you?
please.
Because it was basically written by a U-boat, um, just a conscript. I don't think he was a captain or anything like that, but he was someone who was on the U-boat, and they were able to get a letter out. So,
Hmm.
of course, I'm including it in my book called Secrets of Antarctica, which will be out at the end of this year. And we have to include this letter. It's in the,
Yeah.
let's see, is it in chapter called Nazis in Antarctica? Yeah, here it is. Karl Unger was his name. And the letter reads as follows. Um, he says, wait a minute, this isn't the translated one. Let me get that one. Conan, caught up with the boat. Well, I'll just read the description. They say, for anyone concerning your proposed effort to penetrate the inner realms is hopefully successful. The enclosed photocopy, and it's this handwritten letter in German, um, is from an old comrade. I received it after the war, the original letter. This is the person who received it, giving his take on Karl Unger and his handwriting. And he says the original letter, to clarify, the U-209 was assigned one of the strangest missions of the entire war. It was directed to proceed in an attempt to a mission for the entire war. Clearly, I gotta enlarge this a little bit so I can read it better. It says, it was directed to proceed in an attempt to clarify the actual existence of inner Earth, furnished with charts and directions by Dr. Karl Haushofer. The U-209 was to proceed to a certain latitude and longitude, there to enter a giant undersea cavern with a current of about 6 knots, there to let the U-boat be carried downward and onward. The U-209 was commanded by Captain Heinrich Broda, a most veteran officer of fidelity. You see, there were many in the Third Reich that believed this theory of an existing inner realm. Among those aboard the U-209 was an old friend, one Karl Unger. I received his communication sometime after the war had ended. I know it is genuine because I know his handwriting very well. The approximate English translation of Karl's letter is as follows. So this is what he wrote. Dear old comrade, This news will be a surprise for you. The U-209 undersea boat submarine made it! Exclamation point. The Earth is hollow! Exclamation point. Dr. Haushofer and Hess were right. The whole crew is well, but they cannot come back. We are no prisoners. I am sure this news will reach you, as this is the last connection the U-boat 209 will have. We will meet again someday, comrade. I am worried for everyone who has to spend his life on the surface of Earth. Since the Fuhrer is gone, God bless our Germany always. Very hearty greetings. Signed, Carl Unger. And he says, so if you have a Xerox of the document as promised, I'll write further. I shall be away on certain dates. And then he just did a handwritten note. The confidential number furnished, you must be used only for extremely importance, none else. Also note, the Fuhrer correspondence must be via SASA. I'm not sure what that is. But this letter has been examined by many different people, including the person who got it, who says, yeah, that's his handwriting. And this person or U-boat 209 were never seen from again. So it does show that.
What a find.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that it includes Haushofer and Hess, but Haushofer there, because I think it was 1923, when Hitler tried to overthrow the Bavarian government, he spent some time in jail. He was locked up with Hess, but the person who they had come out and visit them every day was Karl Haushofer. He was an occultist mystic, pretty open about it too. So he had these strange ties with Hitler himself. Haushofer did, and so did Hess. Hess was pretty much known to be an open occultist as well. Hess also funded the Nazis' mission down to Antarctica. So to see their names in that letter, puts up some red flags for me. It's like, what were they doing down there? And did it have an esoteric agenda behind it?
Oh, yeah, big time.
I think so.
In fact, the badge that the New Schwabenland badge has oak leaves, which is the paternity to the Thule Society, or Thule, Thule, depends how you pronounce it. And that was one of the secret societies of Nazi Germany before the war. And they were all over this stuff, Tim. I mean,
oh yeah,
they were going to Tibet. They were looking for the relics of Christianity in southern France. I mean, that movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first one, is very accurate.
Yeah.
They were down there in Egypt and other places looking for these relics, because Hitler believed that if he were to have the Spear of Destiny, which they got on the first day that Austria was annexed into the Third Reich, there's a famous picture of Hitler standing in front of the Spear of Destiny that pierced Jesus when he was up on the cross. But they also needed to find the chalice of the Holy Grail, which they never did.
Mm-hmm.
That one's still out there somewhere. But here's what's interesting with the Spear of Destiny. As it was acquired by the Third Reich at the beginning of the war, it's never been found.
Right.
And some think that they took it down to Antarctica with a lot of other stuff, a lot of hardware, a lot of UFOs and other type of equipment that they were working on in top secret laboratories.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Hitler talked about how he had, when he was a boy, he went, I think it was called the Hoffman Museum in Austria, where they had that Spear of Destiny.
Yeah.
And Hitler went to see it as a boy, and would later recount stories of how he got like a download from the spear itself, like the spear imparted like a message to him, or so the story goes, and it told him, he was going to do great things for Germany and whatnot. But you mentioned the Thule or Thule society. I
Mhm.
think this all points back to that, man. I think you nailed it 100% with that. I mean, even down to the Skyscraper treasure hunter base at the North Pole. I think the Thule Society was behind that. I think that they and the Ahnenerbe Society that
Yeah.
Himmler started up, they were, like you said, going all over looking for relics, and they had this fascination with the poles. And it just makes me wonder if they found something, whether it be a an entrance into the earth or an ancient civilization or an ancient technology or all of the above. It makes me wonder what they found down there because they were certainly looking.
Oh, they sure were. And some might argue that they never actually left. So
Yeah.
when I was heading down there, starting to plan my trip about 7 years ago, I'm poring over maps. I love maps. I use them for my research all the time, and I draw them. A big, a big map enthusiast. So I'm looking at these maps that date back to the Cold War era. So after World War II, when the Soviet bloc and NATO countries were at odds, Antarctica had several bases, Russian, Soviet bases down there that are now Russian bases, US, Norwegian, British bases that were spying on the Nazis. But get this, Tim, the Germans never left New Schwabenland. There was a flag for West Germany on their bases in that same area that they claimed. They never left. And in fact, they're still there to this day. And
Wow.
yeah,
That's a great
so
find. You're finding all, I can't wait for this book to come out. Secrets of
that's gonna be
Antarctica.
cool.
Man, that's
Yeah.
cool stuff. That those are two things that I had never heard. And including this letter. Man, what a find. Did the Russians, they, you mentioned them too. They got a hold of some of those Ahnenerbe Society documents, right? Was there,
Oh
did you
yeah.
find anything regarding that and maybe Antarctica?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Anna Society, that's a really interesting one because they were into this whole idea of this master race, and they that went all the way back to Atlantis. They were totally into the whole notion that the Aryan people were these descendants of Atlantis who had this techno magical ability, right, for flying saucers and for a whole lot of other things. And so part of the quest was to find whatever they could find for using the techno magical technology for the war effort. And they were ramping up. They knew they were going to go to war in the 1930s, but they knew that they didn't have the kind of numbers that Russia had or that America had and other countries. So they had to be quantitative uh, and qualitative superiority. So that's why all their tanks and their planes and their armaments and even the helmets and everything they had was better than the Allies in every department, but they just didn't have the numbers, and that eventually is what took them down. But in the 1930s, the Ahnenerbe Society is looking all over the world for anything they could find that could give them this qualitative advantage. And for the most part, they found a bunch of stuff, even in Tibet. When the Soviets were the first to take over Berlin in May 1945, supposedly Hitler committed suicide. I think they just offed his doppelganger and he escaped. In
I
fact, there's a
agree.
great History Channel series called Hunting Hitler, three series. I went to a bunch of those locations in Argentina and Chile. He escaped. He lived
Yeah.
out his life in South America. But when the Russians got there, they got down in the Führer bunker and they found these Asian looking people wearing SS uniforms, and they had all committed suicide, Harry Carey, and their feet were all pointing inward around like the black sun. And it was just because one of the Soviet soldiers had come from Siberia, he could recognize the people. He said, those are all Tibetan. They were Tibetan SS officers in Berlin at the end of the war. What are they doing there? Unless they were part of this Anunnaki society and supplying this ancient wisdom
Yeah.
to the Third Reich.
I think so. I mean, and we have the pictures just for people listening. I'm sure Brad's seen these pictures, but you can look up pictures online from that expedition. The Nazis definitely went to Tibet. And I think they did a lot more than just measure faces out there, which I think that's significant. I think that they were looking for an old bloodline, perhaps, and that ties into why they measured faces. But they were also, I think, fascinated in some of the things that maybe Blavatsky had talked about to do with the lost city of Lhasa and that ancient library there. It's like a fortified castle library where they have all these old books. That's where you're going to find a lot of information on, speaking of UFOs, old flying devices like Vimanas and stuff like that. So I think that their reasoning for working with the Tibetans was very extensive. And I also think, this is what I wonder. This is what I want to like propose this question to you. I'm starting to think that maybe the Earth is like kind of looks like a giant toroidal field, and maybe it has holes at each pole. And I wonder if that's some information that they got from the Tibetans.
Well, they were certainly fascinated with the polar regions. There's no doubt about that. Not only Antarctica, which we spoke earlier about the hole in the ice near the South Pole, toroidal field down south. But I work with fellow researcher Brooks Agnew. He has the GPS coordinates to the hole in the north. And then this is the whole notion of Thule and other ways to get into inner Earth, where this magnificent race of people live, very high tech, similar to what Admiral Byrd says in his diary, were the Ariani domain down in the South Pole, that there was also civilization in the north, as well as in Tibet. And Tibet is Shambhala, Shangri-La, it goes by all these different names, these mythical places, but they're all very similar in as much as they had very high-tech, human-like entities that lived their entire existence below the surface of the earth. And this is what the Anunnaki Society was so desiring to discover and make contact with, because they felt, well, we're one and the same. So as all we have to do is make the introduction, and then you guys are going to be on our side and supply us with the technology, and we'll take over Europe and win the war, and we can rule the surface the way we see fit. But
Yeah.
things didn't work out that way.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what you're saying here. You mentioned high jump earlier. We know in 1946, the U.S. sent down a team. Actually, it was like an army led by Byrd down to the South Pole. They call it Operation High Jump.
Yeah.
I found something that's very interesting. At the same time that they sent them down, they also sent a team up to the North Pole, and it's called Operation Nanook. And I looked through some of the documents there, and it says that it's an extension of Operation High Jump. And they went up to that Nanook expedition while Byrd's going down to South Antarctica. Nanook goes up, and they go straight to a place called Thule. And I don't, we know the Nazis were kind of a part of all this. The reasoning for these operations had something to do with the Nazis. And we're talking about the Thule Society. I just don't think it's a coincidence that they went up to a base called Thule, because the Nazis had established that when they took Denmark.
Yep.
And that's a Space Force base to this day.
You're right. We took it over from the Nazis and
Yep.
made it our northern Greenland base. That's why Trump is pushing so hard to acquire Greenland.
I think so.
It's a very strategic location up there. And maybe they are hiding this location of the other toroidal opening to inner Earth. You would think it would have to be one of the biggest secrets of the intelligence agencies, as it is in the South. There are NSA agents that are at the South Pole Station all the time. And you're in big trouble if you defy that no-fly zone over that one section that Admiral Byrd did his
Yep.
extra flyover after he discovered the South Pole. You would think, okay, you make it to the South Pole, all the readings are, yeah, you're at 90 south, you're done, head on back to Little America. No, they spent another hour surveying this area because I think he saw it in the cockpit and they wanted to.
Yeah. I think so too. I think people should keep their eye on this Greenland stuff that's happening in the news right now. Because I mean, I saw last week or maybe the week before, JD Vance went up there, and that's the vice president, right? JD Vance, I think that's his name. So in all the articles, they have a picture of him standing with Camp Century behind him. And they don't say anything about Camp Century in any of the articles, but obviously he was there because it's in the picture. And that's like an old, they say it's an old Cold War base, but it's like 100 feet down below the ice. It's like, it had the nickname like the city under the ice or something like that. It is like miles and miles of tunnels down there. But you also have this Thule Air Base up there. So, and then you have, at the inauguration, all those tech guys that you saw like standing next to Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg, they've all invested boatloads of money into this Greenland project. So something's going on. Something's definitely going on.
Something's definitely going on, more than just walruses and Eskimos.
Yeah. And it may not be a negative thing. It might be a positive thing. Who knows? Like, it's too early to tell with Trump. I hope to God that he's doing the right thing with all this. But with Thule, with that word, I do want to hit you with one more thing because, well, let's just talk about the black goo and we'll see if Thule comes back up.
Oh, and it will.
Okay.
You know where you're going with this.
Yeah, your research on the black goo is fascinating, and I'd love to hear your take on all that, because I don't think it doesn't get talked about as much anymore as it used to.
No, it really doesn't. And it became part of my Antarctica research because southern Thule Island, there's that name again, is way down there. Just it's closer to Antarctica than it is to South America. And it's basically a frozen volcano year round. And if you go there, I would encourage your listeners to type in South Thule Island. It's in the South Atlantic. Take a look at this volcanic island, but one section of it is obscured on Google Earth. It's pretty common whenever they're trying to hide something, they'll put a layer over it so you can't zoom in and get a clear resolution. And that is, I believe, where the Corbett Uruguay base was located. Now, this was a base that was run by the Argentinians for several years until the Falkland Wars. And you can go on Wikipedia and research the Falkland Wars, and you'll see, and I use this map in my conference presentation about it, that the flotilla of the British Navy split into two parts. One part went to fight the very famous battles of the Falkland War, and they sank a ship called the Belgrano with a great loss of Argentinian lives, very young sailors too. They didn't even need to do that. It was a very vindictive war, that Falkland Wars. The British were there very heavy-handedly. They even brought down a nuclear submarine. It's like, come on, what do you need that for? But the second branch of the Armada went on this secret mission. It's called Operation Keyhole, and it's still classified because they went and conquered these very sparsely populated islands called the South Sandwich Islands. And then they kept going down the archipelago. Most of them were uninhabited until they got to South Thule Island. And the warships are right offshore. The scientists in the Corbett Uruguay, they raise the white flag, they surrender without a shot being fired. The Falkland Wars ended on the British ship. They signed the surrender papers there. But what was so important about South Thule Island that it would require this second flotilla to go down there and capture it, and where the war ended? Well, this is where they were working on studying the black goo. And it was in a very ancient cave on the island. I think it's in that part of the peninsula that is obscured. And they were basically keeping it frozen, because when it's frozen, it's inert. It can't do anything. But when it warms up, it started taking a life of its own. And I've met Miles Johnston, who does the Basis Project. I've been on a interview with Harold Kotzvela. He's a leading spokesperson for the black goo and describes it, as well as David Griffin, who's been on the Basis Project with Miles. I've seen several of his interviews. And they all say the same thing, that the whole Falkland War operation was to go get the black goo, because they wanted to use it for their super soldier program. Because when ingested, and supposedly this is how these the reptilian ET species will drink the black goo when they're out in space or in a very stressful or dangerous mission, and it gives them this superhuman strength and stuff. So the Brits are thinking, well, we could use that. Let's go fetch it. and when they were bringing it back, that's as soon as the ships got over the equator, it started getting loose. So they had to eventually, they got it to Marconi Laboratories. And again, it got out. Many of the scientists that worked for Marconi Laboratories died under very mysterious causes. And they basically threw their hands up. We can't do anything here. But the stuff had already gotten out. And now I believe it's been weaponized. And it's used as the ferrofluids, or the graphene oxide. Behaves very much like the black goo, that it can self-assemble. And it has this, it's pseudo life. It's kind of this fake life form that was deposited here. And so an author named Alec Newall, he wrote a series of magazine articles in Nexus magazine. I think he wrote a book on it as well. He basically describes it being brought here in the event that if humans were ever going to be deposed of their place on the surface of the planet, that it could be used to rapidly clone and reproduce the human race. But it was stored down in South Thule Island to keep it frozen and inert. And so that's what the scientists were studying when the British ships showed up, and then took it all, and then they blew up the base. That's no longer there. And I'm sure they collapsed the cavern entrance as well. So even if you went there,
Well,
you wouldn't
yeah.
find much.
The British did that with some other old Nazi bases as well. They went in and they just blew them off the map. They did that. I don't remember the name of the island, but it's up there where the people speak Frisian on North Germany. There was a couple islands out there, and a rumored German intelligence hub was there, and the Brits went up there and blew it up. But what I think is interesting about this story with Black Goo is that they wanted to use it for their super soldiers. That's
Mhm.
that's some X-Men sci-fi stuff. As if the Black Goo isn't sci-fi enough, right?
Right.
But the I don't know, man. Like, what's weird, and this just kind of occurred to me. The British had Hess in their possession during the 80s. They killed him after this mission.
Oh, Hess, yeah. Well, he
Yeah.
tried to, the British royalty are mostly, they're German.
Mhm.
They're Kolberg, Saxe, Gotha. They're German royal families that changed their name to Windsor after the Windsor Castle. It's not their real last name. So Hess was trying to reach one of the Scottish princes, I believe, and he just narrowly missed getting there by 20 miles. So he had to crash in a field and then he got captured. He lived his entire life in the Spandau prison. And he was on trial with the Nuremberg trial, but since he didn't really do much because he had basically been captured in the early years of the war, trying to sue for peace, trying to say, "Hey, you guys should join us. We're going to hit the Russians and we're going to take over Europe. And Britain is not our enemy because they're Aryan people too. So they did not want to go to war with Britain. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes Hitler made, he had the whole French and the British expeditionary team cornered at Dunkirk. He could have just annihilated them, and the whole Western Front would have just been a non-issue. He let them escape, much to the detriment of D-Day a couple years later when those same troops came roaring back. So he gave them too many opportunities to join, and they didn't want to. It was basically Winston Churchill that just said, no compromise, no way, we're not going along with them. But of course, Russia has Whitehall, which is the central bank of all central banks. It's the very first central bank that was bought out by the Rothschild dynasty during the Battle of Waterloo, because it was the Rothschild had a very sophisticated spy network, and he got word, Nathan Rothschild got word that Napoleon had lost the Battle of Waterloo, but he started selling his shares secretly as if Wellington, the British commander, had lost. And so everybody said, hey, Rothschild's selling. We better sell. That means we lost and we're going to be at war with the French for another several years. It was all a bluff, because at the end of the day, Nathan Rothschild bought it all back, including stock in the central bank. That was the first one that they could control, and they control to this day in the city of London, which is like a separate entity in the city of London. Surrounding it, 1 square mile is the banking district. And this is the money portion of the Empire of Three Cities. The other one is a micronation called Vatican City, right in the center of Rome. But it has its own laws, its own police officers, even its own post office. And the third is Washington, D.C. You notice how Washington, D.C. is a district. It's not a state. It doesn't have senators. And so this is the globalist control grid, was using these little micronations within the larger nations to exert their control. The money out of the city of London, spirituality out of the Vatican, and military might out of our Washington, D.C.
Yeah, there you go. There's your one world order crowd for sure. And if you want to throw in another place with weird borders, you could throw in CERN. I hear that they've got some sort of a weird, I don't know, some sort of legal borders or something that's similar to the Vatican. But yeah, it does seem like those are the big three that you mentioned. And I would add in the fourth with CERN. And or maybe Switzerland in general, like all the banking that goes on there. But yeah, fascinating stuff. And I wonder, just to go back to like the Nazis for a second, I do wonder, since they had Hess so long, and during Nuremberg, they did try Karl Donitz, the admiral, but he lived on to be, I don't know, old. Basically, I mean, he lived up until at least the 70s. So I wonder if those guys like Hess and Donitz kept some of this information about Antarctica close to the chest and used it as a bargaining chip for their life. It's like, well, we're not going to tell you everything. We're going to slow drip information to you so you don't kill us. I don't know. I just, that's conspiratorial, I suppose, but I do wonder about that. And I wonder what Donitz knew about all this.
Well, he let it slip in 1943. He was speaking to his U-boat crew, because he was the top admiral in the Navy. He said, we have created for the Fuhrer an impregnable fortress, I'm paraphrasing, in a land of ice, in a very inhospitable, faraway land. Sound exactly like either the Thule base of northern Greenland or the New Schwabenland base of Antarctica. And the fact that they could get those U-boats under the ice, they made U-boat bases literally around the world, not just in the Arctic regions, but in the Canary Islands, at Fuerteventura Island. They're still there. And
Yeah.
apparently, I was just speaking at a conference with David Hatcher Childress. He has books on Antarctica too. And he said some scuba divers went down there, found the entrance in, came up in a Nazi U-boat facility, and there was still one U-boat in the dock, still there.
Wow.
So, this is the kind of thing, Tim. I mean,
love
man, there's a lot of mysteries out there. A lot of stuff to explore.
I know, and that's why I'm so excited to see a new book on Antarctica coming out. I mean, especially from someone like yourself who's like, you do boots on the ground research, man. And I mean, that's invaluable these days, priceless. And I mean, but my point is, like, to see a new book on this come out is perfect, because I think that this is an issue that's just there for the decoding still. We still haven't figured this out, because high jump's still classified.
Yeah.
And it's still classified for a reason, folks, because there's stuff they don't want us to know about down there regarding the poles. And, I've done some speculating today, but we can narrow it down, I feel like, to Nazis being involved.
There you go.
Well,
I just shared you the link for Secrets of Antarctica on
Cool.
Amazon, if you want to include that with the video.
Yeah, we'll include that.
Order it now.
Yeah. Yeah. People can check the description below and get a link directly to the book. I think I even heard recently that and I don't know if you've heard this or not, I don't know the details, but like some German speaking people showed up randomly in Antarctica trying to get a ride out or something.
Yeah, Michael Sala and Elena Denon, they reported on this 3 years ago. There was a big exodus of German-speaking people in the middle of winter down there. It was our summer up here, that they just showed up at McMurdo Base and it just was like, get us out of here. That was also the very same time that Gene Decode, who looks into all of the underground bases and earthquakes that take place 10 kilometers down, he said that's the level where they have their tubes, the train tubes that can travel at Mach 2 speeds. So there were all these anomalous earthquakes between southern Argentina and Chile and the pan-Antarctic islands that I visited, including King George Island and Elephant Island up in the northern tip of the Palmer Peninsula. Right at the same time, they're having all these earthquakes. It's 10 kilometers down. Then these Germans show up and say, we just want to be evacuated, get us out of here. And they're military-age men, primarily.
What do you think about the notion of a breakaway civilization? I mean, we know that, like you said earlier, some of the Nazis got out, probably Hitler. I think he got out. I think he made it to South America. And, if there is a list of Nazis that were indeed living in Argentina and other places that anybody can look up, like it's a known thing. It's a known fact. Juan Perón was letting them in, and he was facilitating exit plans for them. Essentially, he was helping to establish an escape route for Nazis to get down there. So I think that Perón had like continued Nazi black projects in Argentina with guys like Richter.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What I'm wondering, how far do you think they were able to get after the war with some of this technology?
Very far, because he kept the best stuff. So I went to this area near this other major German enclave. There's a second mountain range in Argentina. Of course, the Andes are the big mountain range to the west, but there's also trying to remember the name, but it's near the city of Cordoba. I think they're the Cordoba Sierras, and they're only about 5,000-6,000 feet tall. They're much smaller than the Andes. But there's a location there where we arrived in the town and there's aliens and UFOs on the billboards and stuff. And it's this famous location where they were sighted UFOs from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It was even written about in our Lonely Planet guidebook. So my girlfriend and I, at the time that I was traveling with, we decided to camp out at night. We did a mountain watch. We didn't see anything, but we tried. Anyways, I get back to America, and I told my friend David Atcher Childress, famous Ancient Aliens star, that we went to this town, Corbetta Monte. My Spanish isn't very good, but it's near the town of La Falda, which is where the Eden Hotel was and sightings of Hitler after the war. And then so David says to me, Brad, those weren't UFOs in that mountain. That was an underground base of the Fourth Reich. And they were practicing, they're just doing their maneuvers. They're going out and doing what they got to do to fly these craft. So he said this was one of the primary underground bases that was built to house some of these Honeyboo and Vril craft. And they even had a mothership called the Andromeda craft, which was a cigar-shaped craft. And that too was spotted all over South America in this time frame. And he said, if it's a real UFO, it doesn't leave a burn mark on the ground. It doesn't have smoke trailing from time to time. It doesn't have rivets. Real UFOs are just perfectly smooth. Doesn't show signs of being manufactured in a factory. And so all the telltale signs that this was like the Area 51 of the Fourth Reich.
Wow. It makes you wonder. I know I was looking into this guy, Hans Kammler. He was
He went disappearing at the end of the war.
He disappeared. Where did somebody got him? He went somewhere, and he was the guy who was working on that Bell project.
Yep.
And there were sub projects under that. One of them was called Project Kronos, which might time, the concept of time or manipulating time might be a part of that. And there was another title under the Bell Project called, I don't remember the German for it, but it translated to the Lantern Bearer. And I just thought that was a very cool esoteric kind of a title. It's like, what were they doing there with that? But anyway, that Bell, when you talk to these guys who were in the camps there in Poland who survived the war, some people came forward later and said they did see an object levitating. People who were in the camp said they saw a barrel or bell-shaped object floating above the tree line one night, glowing pale blue. It went up over the tree line and it went back down.
Yep.
And, if you look into it, there was all sorts of very infamous Nazi scientists in the area at the time who lived after the war and went on to work for these governments. It wasn't just superpowers. We got some, Russia got some, the Brits got some, but also Argentina, Juan Perón. So it does make me wonder, like, how many of these modern sightings could possibly be Nazis? And, what about like the 1952 DC flyover? What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think those are Antarctica Nazis sending a very powerful message to our military that you cannot shoot us down. So in my capacity as a book publisher, I publish Laura Eisenhower's book, Awakening the Truth Frequency. And she's been doing a lot of interviews lately with Dan Cooper, who we quote in this book, and had some insight into the surrender to the Fourth Reich Nazis in Antarctica after the flyover. And Dan Cooper just revealed that the original Washington Post article about that flyover, and it was a dozen or more of these craft, but they had hovered right over the Capitol building for several hours. He says it's in the original article. They've kind of tried to scrub it as best they can. But Dan Cooper, I just heard this in an interview a few days ago. I want to certainly try to get a hold of this article, that they dropped down their stormtroopers and basically held Congress captive to basically sign over surrender treaties to the Antarctica Nazis. And history as we know it is totally different. And if this is true, then Truman basically sold us out, and Laura Eisenhower's great grandfather, Dwight D. Eisenhower, he had no choice but to go along with this. And here's the
Mm.
supreme commander of the Allied forces having to capitulate as a president to the Fourth Reich Nazis because they had all this technology. So history as we know it, as Voltaire says, is the Mississippi of lies. It's nothing like what we think it is.
Yeah, yeah, wow. I hope you can get a hold of that article. That is something else. Who was that? Cooper?
Dan Cooper,
Dan
yeah. We
Cooper?
quote him
Wow.
quite extensively in the book, and he
Yeah.
knew quite a bit about, yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of this esoteric history. And of
Hmm.
course, I write the whole series on esoteric books, and I've got a lot of other Nazi related material
Yeah.
and high technology in my other esoteric books.
Yeah. I know you like old maps.
Hmm.
Perry Reese map.
Oh, geez. Wow.
Yeah.
There's a whole chapter in my upcoming book called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings.
Mm.
Yeah, that's the grandfather of them all. Because if we could take a look at the Perry Reese map, it basically shows Antarctica free of the
I think
ice.
so.
So I think for sure the Anunnaki Society knew about this Perry Reese map. And isn't it interesting that the location that they chose to claim is is featured on the Perry Reese map from 1513? That is 300 years before the first modern humans set foot in Antarctica. So how would they know that? How would they know the lay of the land and the islands under the ice? Yep, there we go. So you see how it extends on the bottom to the right. That's yep,
Stupid
that's
Wikipedia.
South America. Very accurate, considering this is only 21 years after Columbus's original voyage that they could map out South America so accurately. Yeah. So the very, very bottom right there, that's
Hmm.
about where New Schwabenland was.
Hmm.
And in
You,
fact, those islands you see in the bay there is under the ice, and they've done sonar scanning and found that there really are those islands down there. And that, so how did they map Antarctica before it had ice covering on it? Another great mystery.
and okay, so you've got this little jut of land down here in the bottom
Yeah.
right, right? And if you look close, people, you could see there's a snake drawn in there.
Hmm.
And if you read the Perry Reese map in some of the script off to the side, the Spaniards talked about how they did not want to make make land. They didn't want to come off their boats down here because they said it was snake infested and hot.
Mm.
And it just seems like maybe something happened there with maybe it wasn't as cold as it is now. I don't know. I don't think that that's South America at all
No.
anymore. It's definitely down in the Antarctic region, but in the 1500s when this map was, I guess, 1513 or something like
Yep.
that, it makes me wonder if there was some sort of, I don't know, the temperatures on Earth were different. That's one of the biggest enigmas for me with this map.
Yeah, because no way could snakes survive there now.
No, no.
And in those notes there to the left there, Piri Reis also says that he works off of source maps, some of which came from the Library of Alexandria. So this is what Charles Hapgood, who wrote the book called Map of the Ancient Sea Kings, also suggested is that a lot of these maps came from much earlier source maps where they were able to copy the outlines of the continents here.
You've got the cryptids on here too.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's a giant there with that red hat. And
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
and
Yeah,
he's much
redheaded
bigger than that
giant.
guy, but his head is his body. So
Yeah,
that's kind of weird.
bizarre. I wonder if these if South America was connected to Antarctica at one point or darn near close to it because they just discovered there's a microcontinent between Greenland and Canada.
Hmm.
And it's almost as if part of Greenland broke off and is now underwater. And I suspect that possibly happened to Antarctica. Maybe there was a portion of Antarctica that connected to South America that's now maybe broken off. It's just a theory. I'm just playing around with it. But yeah, I just saw something the other day about this microcontinent between Greenland and Canada, which I thought
Hmm.
was fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we could wrap it up with this. I was reading in your book Beyond Esoteric last night, and I found a part that I really liked. I wanted to just share it with everybody. You said, once the truth comes out, this will be the shift of the ages, the transcendental ascension of monumental changes to humanity. And I think that's important. And it's important to me. It's like the crux of this show that we help get this truth out. Because we had a conversation today that might go over some people's heads. I hope it doesn't, but we talked about some pretty wacky stuff. But it's stuff that's researched. It's stuff that's been hidden from people. It's not that it's not true. It's just that it's not told and suggested as truth. So I don't know. I love that part. And do you think that we are in a great awakening?
Oh, absolutely. That term only became popularized during the COVID era. And now I would say we're in the zeitgeist of ages. That's a German term for we're living in these very unique times. And this is a period that's going to really be remembered in history for a long, long time because of everything that's happening at breakneck speed. I mean, we are just seeing history unfold, it seems, on a daily basis. Just so many new revelations are coming out. And they just admitted, I think it was a Pentagon official a couple days ago, that we have the ability to transcend space and time. So
Yeah.
basically admitting that we already have time machines now.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, where is this going to go to the point where they're just going to have to start unveiling this stuff?
Yeah.
So
It
it's a
goes
great
back.
time to be alive.
It is. It is. It goes back to free energy too. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know how many times somebody has discovered avenues and methods of free energy, and it's just been shut down by the powers that be. I think
Yep.
it's time for that to stop. It's time for that to be shown to everybody, so we can all partake in whatever avenue of free energy it might be. I hope that's where this goes. I really do. I mean, I see it with guests that I have on. I do see people partaking in the Great Awakening, but I still see portions of society that seem utterly brainwashed still. But I'm hoping that the truth wins, as cheesy as that might sound.
Yep. Yeah. Well, just want to remind your audience, if you want to find out more about my work, you can go to cccpublishing.com for all of my books, and Michael Jaco, Laura Eisenhower, Leo Lyons-Agami, and other authors. Or if you want to find out more about what I'm up to and my projects that I'm working on and my upcoming conference schedule, go to bradolsen.com, just as you see it spelled there on the screen.
All right. That's great, man. Everybody be on the lookout for Secrets of Antarctica and check the links below for Brad's stuff. Brad, I want to thank you again for coming on, man. It was a great talk.
Well, thanks for having me on, Tim. It was indeed a great talk, and maybe we should do it again sometime.
Yes, we should. I would like that very much. As always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.